Going a little further on down, we come to a very critical moment where Paankhenamun is led hand in hand by the falcon-headed god Horus, the god of kingship, to an audience with Osiris, the king of the gods and god of the hereafter. In this later period, funerary practice becomes more democratic than in the Old and Middle Kingdoms, and private individuals could enjoy the same benefits of the afterlife that were previously reserved primarily for the king. Now the private citizen becomes one with the gods in death, and only starting around the time of the New Kingdom do we see anyone other than the king being in the physical presence of the gods and actually touching the gods. What I'm particularly interested in here is what's between Horus and Osiris. Sprouting out of the ground is a beautiful lotus blossom, kind of like the one we saw Hemet sniffing on the wall fragment of Menemet. The lotus in ancient Egypt is another symbol of birth and rebirth. It's also a symbol of creation. In one of the few different ancient Egyptian creation myths, you start off with this swirling primeval chaos, the primordial ocean called Nun, nothing else. Then a mound of earth spontaneously rises from the water. Eventually, a single lotus bud springs forth, emerging from the murky, muddy depths of water and earth. The bud blossoms to reveal the infant god Nefertem. He goes by other names in different creation myths like Atum and Ra, but we're talking about the lotus here. Just like in the creation myth, the lotus flower thrives in the dark, marshy waters of the Nile. It rises to the surface from the dark depths, this brilliantly beautiful object emerging from the ugly muck, then opens its petals each morning to greet the sun's nourishing rays. Each night it closes up, symbolically dying according to the Egyptians, and is then reborn each morning with the rise of the sun again. Contrary to popular belief, though, it doesn't actually sink down beneath the water's surface with the setting sun and then rise up again the next morning. That would make for a very attractive symbolism, though. Standing on top of the lotus in this scene, we've got these four little guys all wrapped up in mummiform, just like Osiris behind them. These are the four sons of Horus, minor funerary deities that serve to protect the internal organs of the deceased. You might recognize them as the heads on the canopic jars, the four vessels buried with the deceased, which contain the nicely wrapped, individually preserved soft internal organs. Early on it was more common to have four canopic jars with just human heads, but later, around the late 18th dynasty, it became standard to use the four different heads of the sons of Horus. Everybody wants to know which head protects which organ, so, well, here it goes, and they've got names, too. The first guy, his name's Imseti, and his canopic jar contained the liver. The falcon-headed Kebsinuif took care of the intestines. Happy, yes, that's his name, Happy, with the baboon head, watched over the lungs, and the jackal-headed Duamutef held the stomach. The heart, of course, as we all know, ideally remained in the body. Relevant to our discussion here is the placement of the sons of Horus on the lotus blossom, and their diminutive size relative to the gods around them, as though they're representing the concept of Nefertem, the child god born from the flowering lotus at creation. Just another drop in the hat of this ongoing theme of life, death, rebirth, and resurrection throughout the ornamentation of the mummy case. A fascinating example of using hieroglyphs as symbols in the ornamentation of the scene is present here in the platform that Osiris is standing on. Notice that it's not a perfectly rectangular platform. Rather, the front of the platform is at an angle, roughly 30 degrees maybe. The back side of the platform, however, is a sheer drop-off. The shape of this platform is actually exactly that of the Egyptian hieroglyph called Maat, which means truth, law, justice, and order. And it's often deified in the more recognizable form of the goddess Maat and her symbol, the feather of truth, against which the heart is weighed on the scales of judgment in the entry to the afterlife. So here we have Osiris, god of the dead and afterlife, king of the gods, standing firmly on a platform of truth, law, and justice. Sadly, a platform somewhat lacking in current politics. The goddess Maat also makes a personal appearance on the mummy case. We see her sitting practically at the throat of Paankhenamun, facing the Bennu bird, the Egyptian phoenix, more on that in a second, but the appearance here of Maat is particularly significant. The deceased in Egyptian funerary inscriptions is frequently said to be justified, or literally true of voice, ma'acheru, meaning that you don't speak untruths at judgment and that you were a truthful, just, and righteous individual in life. Ma'acheru can also essentially be taken as synonymous with dead, just as today we sometimes append rest in peace after the names of the deceased when written or spoken. We also see the words ma'acheru written here, above and to the left of the Bennu bird. In this example, you read it from right to left, and the second hieroglyph, or the one on the left, actually represents the human windpipe and lungs. How about that? See, I don't make this stuff up. Briefly, the Bennu was the sacred bird of Heliopolis, the seat of the sun god cults of Ra and Atum. The word Bennu likely derives from weben, meaning to rise up, as in what the sun does each morning. And as with the scarab beetle, the Bennu bird also symbolizes the idea of rebirth. Moving along now down the mummy case, beneath the presentation scene, we come to a peculiar object, the ta-ware. This is the ceremonial standard for the Egyptian nome, or region, called Thinis, also the town of Abydos, a sacred cult center and the mythic burial place of Osiris. The ta-ware means great land or eternal land, meaning the ancient resting place of the god. This emblem is actually a representation of a sacred reliquary of Osiris. The central dome-shaped portion supposedly contains the head of the dead god, surmounted on a tall pole that rises up from the Egyptian hieroglyph for the word mountain, called Ju. This hieroglyph took on a certain afterlife and burial significance, with the association of the western mountainous desert region of Egypt with graveyards and the land of the dead. The hieroglyph for horizon has a similar appearance, with two mountain peaks and a sloping valley in between, and then a solar disk nestled between the two peaks, as the sun might rise or set along a mountainous horizon. This gives the ta-ware a certain charming ambiguity. Is this symbolic of Osiris descending upon death below the western horizon to the land of the dead, or rising as the sun in the eastern horizon, reborn in the afterlife? The answer is undoubtedly yes. You can see that the dome-shaped portion is meant to signify that it houses the head of Osiris, since it wears the twin-plumed crown, which we also commonly see worn by the gods Amun and Min, and also the double cobra uraeus, appearing twice here, on the crown and as a headband, coming off to the right of the reliquary. The latter pair also have their own little crowns, the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, showing that Osiris is the ultimate king of Upper and Lower Egypt.